Welcome to Clear the Air with me, Angela Lim, medical doctor and co-founder of Clearhead, an innovative employee wellbeing platform. Clear the Air is a podcast covering those experiences in your life or questions you have that you feel too vulnerable to share with those around you, such as, why do I feel so lonely? And what can I do to feel happier? We get real and raw on these existential questions on mental health and well-being that's puzzled humans for millennia, sharing the science behind what you're experiencing and the answers behind those questions.
Bringing out the best in ourselves and others is something many of us strive for. But how do we realistically work towards it, especially in the workplace? In this episode, behavioral psychologist Dr. Scott Geller explores how self-motivation, actively caring for people, and evidence-based behavioral change strategies can support personal well-being, leadership, and more connected, high-functioning teams. In this episode, we will highlight the role of community, interdependence, and perspective shifting in fostering self-motivation both for ourselves and for those around us. By bridging the gap between psychological research and real-world application, we will demonstrate how these insights can be applied in everyday life to enhance interpersonal relationships and leadership skills both at home and in the workplace. Dr. Scott Geller is Professor Emeritus of Psychology at Virginia Tech and the former director of the Center for Applied Behavioral Systems. He has authored 55 books and more than 300 research articles looking at behavioral-based interventions to improve human welfare on a large scale. His talent has been well recognized and he has received multiple awards for his work. Welcome, Scott. Well, would you like to kick us off by sharing with us how did you become a behavioral psychologist? And your specific focus on motivation and caring for others?
Wow, that's a very good question. I started out as a cognitive psychologist. In fact, my dissertation is on cognitive psychology. But in graduate school, I visited Anna State Hospital. Maybe some of you know the word Nate Azarin. But the point is, I learned about, they call it behavior analysis, but I call it behavioral science. And I learned about helping people with behavioral science. And I realized that my work in cognitive psychology, although theoretical and so forth, it wasn't helping people. So I decided I wanted to help people, and behavioral science turns out to be, for me, the best way to help people on a large scale. And notice the word actively caring. The academic term is humanistic behaviorism. Behaviorism is acting. Caring is humanism from a psychological perspective.
That makes sense. So when we think about motivation, what do you mean by it? Maybe you could start by providing us a definition of motivation.
That's an interesting question. Motivation, B.F. Skinner, one of my heroes in behavioral science, motivation is all about consequences. You do what you do for what you expect to get by doing it. Of course, sometimes you avoid doing something so as not to get a negative consequence. But if you think about it, motivation is essentially run by consequences. We do what we do, we work hard to get consequences. Or again, we call that positive reinforcement. Or sometimes we work to avoid a negative consequence. And that would be called negative reinforcement. And of course, it's much better to do the positive side. Think about it. You feel much better when you're working to gain something pleasant rather than working to avoid something unpleasant. So that's a simple perspective on motivation, simply consequences.
And so in the context of self-motivation, Are there common consequences that we can implement in our lives to motivate ourselves, or is it very much dependent on the individual?
Was very much on the individual. Now, when we talk about self-motivation, I like to talk about three C words. Three C words: choice, competence, and community. So let's back up with choice. Think about it. You are more motivated when you believe you are doing something you chose to do. Again, that's back to positive reinforcement. When you choose to do something in order to get a positive consequence, you're more motivated. So if you can help yourself, consider the value of choice. And if you want to motivate somebody else, help them have choice. Example, you want to get your young son to dress up for Sunday school. One parent could say, this is what you're wearing. But the other approach would be, here are two possible outfits for you to wear today. Which one do you choose? So again, the value of choice. The second word now is competence. Think about it. When you believe that you are competent at doing something that is worthwhile, you're motivated. So the challenge here is help people see or understand what they're competent at. We call it, by the way, supportive feedback. Give people feedback when they do something well. Allow them, help them to feel competent. Third C word is community. That's an interesting one. When I say community, I mean interdependent. I mean we're all in this together. DC and Ryan, the folks who did the research on this, they called it relatedness. If we just understand that we're all related, we're all working together. By the way, I call it systems thinking. Think of the big system. It's not just you, it's all of us working together. And again, if we promote the idea of community, of relatedness, we're going to promote self-motivation. I'm going to be more motivated when I believe I chose to do something, when I'm doing something that's worthwhile and I feel that I'm competent at doing it. And third, if I believe I'm helping the bigger picture, I'm helping others. That's where the word actively caring comes from.
So when we think about, for example, in the context of, say, at the start of the year, we all have New Year's resolution. We want to be healthier. We want to go to the gym, but we have not much motivation to do it. In that 3C framework that you've just described, how would I sort of self-motivate myself to achieve those goals?
Well, what's the consequence? What are you going to go to the gym for? So specify, man, I want to feel better. I want to be healthy. So that will be the consequence. And you also have to say to yourself, I don't have to go to the gym. I choose to go to the gym. I choose to do this. Why? Because of the consequences I hope, I expect to get. And here's something else to think about. You're not going to get it all at once. Small wins. One small step at a time. Recognize that, and going to the gym one time. And then hopefully you'll start to feel competent at what you're doing at the gym. So now we've got competence and we have choice. You chose to do this. Anyway, yeah, so it is about self-talk. You're talking to yourself, convincing yourself that the consequence I'm going to get is worth the effort. We have to, and again, it is about talking to ourselves. Now, what makes it worth the effort? Why should I do this? Again, I need this. I want this. And maybe part of it is I want to help others. And that's back to the community.
Hmm. I am also mindful that, you often hear in the research, for example, that women are less likely to put their hands up for a new job if they don't feel they've ticked 100% of the job description. Um, and so in this context, for example, of competence and self-efficacy, to motivate yourself to put your hand up to do things that you've not done before, how do you see people bridging that gap of that competence gap, that self-efficacy gap, when maybe you're wanting to do something you've never done before?
Well, we're talking about learning, right? The value of learning. One of my heroes was Stephen Covey, and he said there's the four L words. We live, we love. We live, we love, and we leave a legacy. So it's kind of like, what do you want to do? And of course, learning, it's all about learning. And that's why I was a teacher for so long, because I think teaching and learning is what it's all about. But again, some people might not see it that way. I'm guessing that people want to relate with others. By the way, here's a powerful word, which we seem to be losing it in our culture: social support. Social support from others, relatedness. And what we're learning, that our world is about looking at the cell phone. We don't even look at each other anymore. We're sending text. We think that that's social support. The real social support is talking to another person with empathy. There's a word that we've kind of lost track of. Empathy is, you can only use empathy or feel empathy if you're talking in person with someone. So again, my point here is social support is critical for mental and physical health. And now we're back to that sense of community. Remember, choice, competence, and community.
Amazing. And when you sort of, like some of the examples that I've started off with is much more in the context of individuals and what individuals can benefit for themselves, whether it's personal fitness, whether it's personal career goals. But you've really built your passion on helping others. Maybe we can start off with, why should people care when it feels that the world is so difficult right now and that I'm barely surviving for myself? I don't have the capacity to think about someone I don't know, even if it's just a neighbor down the road.
Well, I saw a note about consequences. It is all about consequences for you. That is, what do you want? Again, we do what we do, what we expect to get for doing it. So what do you want to get? And I'm not going to tell you what you want. You decide, what do you want? What makes you feel good? That's the consequence you work for. And now the challenge is, what do you need to do to get that consequence? One of my consequences, I wrote a book chapter on this, Driven to Make a Difference. So for me, the reason I moved from cognitive psychology to behavioral psychology is because I believe that I can make a bigger difference. That's a decision I made. So again, one thing I want to do and is to make a difference, to help others. But that might not be somebody else's desire. But the challenge is to find out, what consequences do I want beyond food? Now, you all know Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? It's kind of interesting. There's this hierarchy of needs that says we satisfy our physiological needs, then our safety needs, our social needs. Then we got self-esteem. What's at the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Self-actualization. What is self-actualization? Self-actualization is believing you are the best you can be. But I want you all to know that in 1970, Maslow said he was wrong. Even the textbooks, some don't get this. The top of the, he said, I'm wrong. The top of the ladder is not self-actualization. The top of the ladder is self-transcendence. Get that? Going beyond yourself for somebody else. If you really want to feel good about yourself, help somebody else. Now, Maslow said that, and it's interesting if you're reading Maslow, it's really, we made it a hierarchy. He never talked about it as a hierarchy. Listen, you can be hungry and still help others. So you don't have to have your physiological needs satisfied before you climb that ladder. But it's kind of nice to think about it that way. But I want to say it one more time. Maslow said in 1970, and I believe it, the best you can be, the very top, is self-transcendence, doing something beyond self for somebody else. Now, some people, that's part of their life. Teachers, that's what teachers do. That's what doctors do. If you think about it, much of what people do, it's doing it for somebody else. But sometimes we don't recognize that. Helping people see that, can be very motivating.
Totally. And I think that is something that is actually really important to highlight, is that Maslow's hierarchy of needs wasn't quite complete, and that the top of the triangle is actually self-transcendence. It's a very powerful way to remember what we're all striving for. And as you said, when you think about it as a hierarchy or a ladder, you feel that, I can only, once I've satisfied all these needs before I look at helping others. But that's not true. You can do them even at the same time. So I think that's really powerful to kind of consider. And as you said, your interpretation of it is through the actively caring for people program. Like, do you want to talk us through what the process is, what makes it maybe different from traditional behavioral change approaches?
Well, notice I say actively caring. We all care. There's things going on in our world right now. I'm embarrassed for what's going on in our country, for example. It's embarrassing, and we care. We all care, but do we do something about it? Do we actively care? And that's the behavioral part. Let's see. Let me share something with you. I'm wearing a wristband here, and the wristband says actively caring for people. And each wristband has its own identification number on it. So we call it STEP, STEP. What does that mean? S. See something good. Have you ever heard the phrase, see something, say something? You see something bad, report it. Now, I want to turn that around. If you see something good, say thank you. A very important word that relates to self-motivation, but people don't necessarily do this, but I'm going to do it. Gratitude. Show gratitude and feel gratitude, and that can be motivating. 2 words. Interpersonal gratitude is thanking somebody, interpersonal. But then there's intrapersonal. Thank yourself. What are you grateful for? And sometimes if we sit back and just, what am I grateful for? I have so much to be grateful for. Just to be alive, for example. That can be motivating. So again, see something good. Thank that person. Show gratitude. That's the S for STEP. The T is thank them. So C, good behavior. T, thank them. Now I'm back to the wristband. We have these wristbands, and C, thank. And then remember I said each wristband has its own identification number on it. So what you do is you give the person this wristband and you tell them, to report this act of kindness at the website. There's so much reporting of negative stuff. We want to pass on positive stuff. And then after you report it, you know what the P for step is? Pass it on. So I got this wristband. I reported it. It says actively caring for people. Now I pass it on to somebody else. Giving feedback is critical. Talk about motivation. If you give supportive feedback, you are motivating them. The other term is corrective feedback. How do we correct someone when they're doing it incorrectly? Top down, that's wrong. Do it again. I mean, parents need to understand how to give corrective feedback. And now I'm back to that word again, humanistic behaviorism. Another word, empathy. The way to give corrective feedback is to ask questions. Why did you do it that way? Is there a better way to do that? Is there a safer way to do that behavior? Get them to tell you before you tell them. And now we're motivating them to do the right thing, but it's from their perspective. We're listening to their perspective. And the greatest thing is when they finally say, yeah, no, you're right. I should have done it this way. Thank you for the feedback.
That's great. You know, when you think about it in the context of the workplace, would you suggest anything else different beyond what you've already shared about the actively caring for people framework?
Oh, that is a great question. In fact, I want to introduce you to the letters of coach. You know what coach means, coaching people. Let me tell you what those letters mean, folks. C, the first letter is a C, care. Know that I care. You'll care what I know. And I care, by the way, we do this in the workplace. I care so much. The next letter of coach is O. I'm willing to observe your behavior. I'm going to observe your behavior and give you supportive feedback or corrective feedback. By the way, the next letter, while I'm observing your behavior, A, I'm analyzing. I'm analyzing the consequences that are influencing that behavior. See, we're back to consequences again. And we're trying to understand why the behavior is happening. I care, I observe, I analyze. What's the next letter in coach? C. I'm going to communicate to you what I saw. And if I do it right, I'm going to give you supportive feedback for the good and corrective feedback for whatever can be improved. And what's the last letter of coach? H. If I do it well, I have helped you. And by the way, an athletic coach should do the same thing. A teacher, one-on-one, should do the same thing. You talked about the workplace. We started something in our country called behavior-based safety. Behavior-based safety. What is that? It's coaching. Two workers get together and they develop a checklist. What is safe and what is not safe in our workplace, on our job. And when I got the checklist, now I'm willing you can observe me with that checklist. So I walk up to a worker and I say, it's a good time. And I fill out that checklist. Safe, at risk, safe, at risk. That's the observation piece. And then I give them feedback. I tell them what I found was safe and maybe not so safe, could be improved. I communicate and I help. So that's how this whole process can go on in the workplace. And not only for safety, for anything.
That sounds good. I mean, when you think about safety and the workplace, would you beyond checklists, how else would you think about other tools that can be provided for leaders or teams to create safety?
Interpersonal feedback with coaching is the best people can do. Now, while we're talking about, you mentioned the word leader. There's a difference between leadership and management. We manage behavior, we lead people. We manage behavior, we observe what people do, and we give them feedback, or we give them a salary it's back to consequences again. When I say lead people, you know what I mean? We inspire self-motivation. So I'm claiming that leaders inspire self-motivation by promoting choice, competence, and community. So now we're bringing it right back to those 3 C words and self-motivation. And of course, the difference between leadership and management. In our country right now, among the politicians, there's no leadership. It's all management. They're managing people, they're controlling the consequences to control people. Inspiring self-motivation doesn't happen.
I think in those cases when leaders, as you said, aren't really inspiring, there is an opportunity for community. And we see lots of grassroots movements to combat some of the negative news stories that you've alluded to. How do you what have you learned in terms of building community?
Wow. Again, when I say community, I think of interdependency. In our country, we have the Declaration of Independence. I can do it myself. The other word is interdependence. It's not individualism, it's collectivism. And of course, in the USA, we're at a disadvantage because we think of self-serving individualism instead of interdependency. So again, that's community. Community is working together with the vision that everybody does better, everybody achieves. But again, to be self-motivated to do that is a good thing.
When you're a manager, you want to motivate your people and make sure that they feel cared for. But sometimes it does mean, as we talked about before, pushing them outside what they are competent with, because it might be the first time they're doing something. Or it might be themselves as well, feeling incompetent and unfamiliar. So how do you work on that in that context, motivating someone to do something that even you might yourself not be able to know how to do because it might be something completely new?
Let me talk about training. Let me talk about empowerment. What does it mean to feel empowered? Do you feel empowered? Meaning, do you believe you can do something? So empowerment requires 3 things. And this relates to our conversation. It requires 1, self-efficacy. Albert Bandura taught us this. Self-efficacy means I believe I can do it. Now, that takes training, right? I have to train them to believe they can do the job. We're back to competence again. Feeling competent at something might require training and feedback. Please, feedback. When they do it right, yes. And it also requires maybe small steps. Small steps. They don't have to do it all at once. Training. But now we're talking about training. Now, that's the first part of empowerment. Second part of empowerment is response efficacy. Believing it will work. So I believe I can do it. But do I believe that what I am doing will lead to the ultimate vision, will support our mission, whatever the company is doing, whatever our team is doing? That takes education. I might have to teach them, show them the research that says, yes, doing this, example, doing this coaching will reduce injuries in the workplace. The third term for empowerment is, will it work? I'm sorry, can I do it? Will it work? Is it worth it? Is it worth it? Now we're back to consequences. See how is it worth doing all you're asking me to do? What are the consequences we will get for doing it? So again, feeling empowered means I believe I can do it. I believe it will work to bring us closer to the ultimate goal. And I believe it is worth it. Consequences. I know I went off on a tangent, but I think understanding what it means to feel empowered connects directly to feeling self-motivated.
In the context of a group, as you said, the consequence might be a vision of a better world, for example, or a world that is more beneficial for more people. What's one behavior that you want to be seeing in the team to get to this vision that will prove that, it's not just words on a page about, working together and we all care about this? What's the real world action people need to be demonstrating?
One word, actively caring. Now, that changes depending on the situation. But when I see a need, I can help somebody, that's actively caring. I'm using my talent to help someone. I was a teacher for 56 years at the university, and I believed that my teaching was helping those students. I was teaching them behavioral science that they can use throughout their life to make their life better. Again, that motivated me, believing that what I'm doing is helping others.
And is there anything, in the context of that, to me, for example, requires change. Often organizations are not set up to do what you've just described. What does the manager or the leader or the management team need to do to make that change?
Coaching for safety is actively caring. So, and of course, that's just one step, but I could coach for productivity, but coaching for safety clearly means I'm helping others. And again, coach, care, observe, analyze, communicate, help. I might tell you though, when we did it in our country, you know what letter was missing? The second C, communicate. They observed and they filled out checklists and then they put it on the computer. They didn't communicate. And you know why they didn't communicate? They didn't feel comfortable giving corrective feedback because they didn't understand humanistic behaviorism. They didn't understand empathy. Problem was the consultants that went out nationwide and taught behavior-based safety, they didn't understand or know how to coach, how to communicate with empathy. We didn't take the time to teach interpersonal communication or self-motivation. It doesn't happen just like that. You have to kind of think about it and talk about it, and you have to make it practical. See, we're talking about principles, and your questioning is excellent. How do we take these principles and put them to work in our workplace or in our school or in my home? Easier said than done.
Easier said than done. Exactly. How can we strengthen choice, competence, and community so that the right behavior is sustainable? That consistency of the behavior.
We talk about it. We talk about it in teams. We ask our team members, how do we How do we feel choice? Or what do we choose to do around here? I mean, it has to be part of the conversation. And we have to take those concepts like choice. You have to take that word choice and we have to connect it to the real world. How we talk, big difference. Do you have to do it? I ask my students, I have 600 students in introductory psychology, and I say, how many say they have to go to class? Or I choose to go to class. I ask them, how many are here to avoid failure? They all raise their hand. And I say, I'm sorry. Turn it around. You're not here to avoid a negative consequences. You're here to learn. You're here to move forward. You're here for positive reinforcement, not negative reinforcement. Now, what have I done? I'm just talking language, connecting it to the real world. Again, see something, say something. What does that mean? What does that mean? And I'm claiming that we need to turn it around. See something good, say something good. Now, okay, that's a principle. How does it work in our workplace, in our school? How can we make it happen? We eliminated bullying, interpersonal bullying in an elementary school by doing the following. We had the students fill out a 3x5 card of what you see good. What did you see good? I see, again, something is upcoming, deny. Anyway, things come up they fill out a card every day. What did you see good today? And again, it went into a box. And the teacher at the beginning of every day read what people saw that was good. Not aggression, not bullying, but what was good. And the more they did that, the more good things they saw students do. It's kind of like putting the focus on the good stuff rather than the bad stuff. Focus on the stuff we want rather than the stuff we don't want. Again, see something good, say something good, say something nice.
That sounds great. Is there anything else that you've learned in the research you haven't been able to share before we close it off?
I'd like to kind of end with saying, hey, let's keep going. We live, we love, we learn, and we leave a legacy. So let's keep teaching and keep learning and think positive. And again, self-motivation. Everybody wants to be self-motivated. So let's turn it around and consider how much choice you have. And you are competent. Get yourself to be competent at something and help other people feel competent with supportive feedback. Wow, the power of feedback. Giving yourself feedback when you do something well, talk to yourself, but also talk to others. Feedback is critical for improving behavior, which connects to motivation.
That's it for today's episode. If you want to learn more about how Clearhead can support your workplace, or you have a burning mental health question that you'd like us to explore on the podcast, check us out at myclearhead.com and drop us a message. Love our content? Share it with a friend or leave us a comment on LinkedIn, Instagram, or Facebook. Thank you so much again for listening and catch you on the next one.